Welcome to the Massey Dialogue. Bienvenue. My name is Nathalie Des Rosiers and I'm the principal of Massey College. Massey College is built on Indigenous lands, the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to be here today to discuss a fabulous and very important subject. I am delighted to have with me today three wonderful guests who will be talking about what does it mean to be Black and do politics in Canada. So I want to say the purpose of Massey Dialogue is always to recognize the mission of Massey, which is to nourish learning and serve the public good. And we know that it's by having good conversations about important issues that we complete our mission. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. First, we will have the Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine. She made history as the first Black woman ever elected to Canada's Parliament. She served from 1993 to 2006. Her role included Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Minister of Multiculturalism and Status of Women, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Deputy Speaker. And she also, her big legacy is the historic Black History Month motion and the famous 5 motion that honored women's suffrage. From 2007 to 2015, she was Ontario's first ever Fairness Commissioner, very important job. And in 2008, the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community and the Diaspora was launched at York University to help advance education. We are so happy to have you. You have many honors, the Order of Canada, the Order of the British Empire, and lots of honorary degrees that I won't all mention, but I am so delighted to have you with us today. It's my real honor.
So well, Madam Principal.
Merci.
I am honored too.
So let me now hear from our second guest will be Dr. Jill Andrew. She is the MPP for Toronto-St. Paul, and she serves as the official opposition critic in culture, women's issue, and heritage. She's the founding member of the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, and she was the first ever queer Black person to be elected to the Ontario legislature. And she is she's a fabulous MPP, is winning awards for her work, and we're so delighted to have her here. She has a diploma from Humber College, a master's degree from Toronto New College, and a PhD from York Faculty of Education. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Jill, for being with us today. It's wonderful to see you again.
Wonderful to see you too, Nathalie. Thank you.
Yes. And then we'll have Matthew Green, who was elected member of Parliament, who's the elected member of Parliament for Hamilton Centre. He made history as well when he became the first person of color elected to Hamilton City Council in 2014. During his time, his policy initiatives focus on equity, economic justice, sustainability. He has a political science and legal studies degree from Acadia and also from McMaster and from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Prior to going into politics, he owned a small business, and more recently, he served as the executive director of the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion. Bienvenue, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. So let me go to Dr. Augustine. Yes. So my first question is to ask you to reflect a little bit on your experience. What was it to be the first Black woman ever elected? How did you experience racism and discrimination in your life?
Well, first of all, I want to say how pleased I am to be with you as a senior of Massey, to have an opportunity to be part of this dialogue with these 2 young people who are now breaking paths in the political arena. What was it when I became the first Black woman elected to the Parliament of Canada? I had been engaged and involved in activism from the day I set foot in Canada. Canada at the time, and Toronto in particular, was a different place. And I've been saying over and over, we had no Charter of Rights and Freedom in 1960-61. As you know, this didn't come till 1982 with that very special section Section 15 that we refer to all the time. You cannot discriminate on the basis of. We had no human rights code. That came around 1962. We had no landlord and tenant act, so that a landlord can say it's for rent, but not for you. We had no rules that governed opportunities, promotional opportunities, or entrance in job and employment with especially major corporate bodies, so that they could say things like, you passed the initial whatever, but you're not a good fit for our organization. The school boards were not talking to parents. So we had all these things in the society. And at the same time, one had to be an activist around those areas. In other words, we didn't have government saying, now what can we do for those people? I started in education, as you know, and teaching social studies. There was nothing in the social studies module that spoke about our indigenous or Inuit or Métis people. There was nothing that spoke about the participation of people in the political arena. And so when I allowed my name to be put forward, and as a woman, one had to be asked. You know, I didn't say, okay, I want to get into politics. I was talked into politics after a vast amount of experiences on boards, participation in community activities, and being the head of Metro Toronto Housing Authority, social housing, where I saw the situation of people in rent compared to income, and where I realized very, very early that decisions are made in the political arena, in legislative processes, in policy, those who make policy decisions. And therefore, it was not a difficult decision after I was talked into that I would get there. Of course, the climate was such that people would make prejudicial statements. It's now called microaggression. We nuance language as we move. We used to talk about prejudice and discrimination. And at the same time, I think that the discussions at the time were such that one could either be disabled by it or one could rise above it. And so when my name was forward, when I went knocking at doors, I must say that in Etobicoke Lakeshore, I had no comments about my race or my color or anything of the kind. I was a school principal in the area, and I was known in the area. Actually, you know, I used to do the big school concerts that would fill the auditorium with parents and parent communities. And so there was no talk about we won't vote for her because she's Black. But the night of my win, it was a reporter who came up to me and said, how do you feel winning as a Black woman? And that question stayed for a long time because it was repeated by others what my answer was. And it was taken in a negative way, the answer that I gave. I said I didn't run as a Black woman. I ran as a liberal, believing in certain things with a passion, And the reporter wrote that no sooner did I win than I said. And there again, I mean, the reality of the situation, the hall was filled with people from all of the ethnic and racial and cultural and religious groups who live in Etobicoke Lakeshore. So I couldn't at that point in time just say, okay, I'm a Black woman, I'm going to Ottawa now as a Black woman. But at the same time, I realized that there were things in the society that needed mending. There were some things we needed to do. There were important conversations, as you said, that had to take place. And I'll leave you with this one story. Immediately after getting my office on Parliament Hill. And you know how the mail comes in right after you're elected, piles of mail. And they just hired some staff and they're going through the mail. And someone said, look at this, Jean. There was a letter from someone in British Columbia. And the letter was to the point. It said, now that you're elected, Mrs. Augustine, get me out of here. So there was a black man thinking, I had the power, I'm now elected, so I can just make, get him out of prison. The bottom line was that for the community and for everyone who was a black person in Canada who were following what was happening in the political arena, they realized that this was an important statement. And then look at these young people you have here today.
Yeah, we'll go and hear whether it's you broke through and it's so wonderful, but heightened level of scrutiny about what you were saying is, and let's see whether it's still the case to the people that were elected more recently. So, Dr. Andrew, what do you say? Did you feel a heightened level of scrutiny about your election?
I would certainly say that I felt scrutiny. I felt scrutiny during the campaign process, and I certainly have felt scrutiny as an MPP representing our fine community here in Toronto-St. Paul's. I want to make it very clear, before I was a proud New Democrat, before I was orange, I was black. I've always been black. So for me, I approach everything, whether it's my education journey, whether it's my time in any workplace, and certainly politics is no different, as a black queer woman, So my experience in this setting has been unique. It's been interesting, to put it lightly. I remember in my first year as an MPP, being told by one of the government members that I was throwing tone in one of my responses. Now, as you would know, Nathalie, question period can be a very, or should I say one of my questions, question period can be a very heightened, dramatic affair at Queen's Park. But as a black woman sitting at Queen's Park, the first queer black woman to sit in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, and knowing the sorts of socially constructed stereotypes, racist stereotypes, sexist stereotypes that are particularly thrown at black women, if I may be explicit about that. When a minister suggests that, you are throwing tone simply because you're demonstrating passion and you're speaking to the issues on that particular day, it was about education. This is not commonplace. I can certainly tell you that in my time as an MPP, I have received a postcard to my constituency office that said the N-word on it, along with sexually explicit images that were also on that postcard. The reality is, being black in Ontario, regardless, of where you happen to work, is not the issue. My blackness is never the issue. The issues that black people have to face are the systemic barriers, the institutional violences, the everyday violence that we face, whether that's at the hands of an education system, that for a very long time, has not, in my opinion, gone far enough to have inclusive curriculum that reflects Black lives, not only previous history, but current day and future projections to where we can be, whether it's in the workplace. I mean, we see now with COVID-19, that it is Black folks, who are disproportionately shouldering the brunt of COVID-19 as essential workers, as frontline healthcare workers. We see this in other spheres as well. We look at housing, we see the housing crisis we have and how many, BIPOC folks are impacted by that. So at the end of the day, my experience as a Black politician You know, it mirrors experiences I have had as a Black student, as a Black educator, as a Black employee. My Blackness is excellent. You know, that's never an issue for me. The issues that we face are those systemic barriers that we have to address. And, you know, that's why I'm so glad to be a member of the New Democrat Black Caucus, a first of its kind in Ontario's history. But it is the 21st century. You know, so part of the work that I have to do, you know, paying homage to folks like the Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine and folks like Charlie Roach, for instance, is to ensure that I bring on board, you know, more Black young people, Black people across the age spectrum to consider politics as a place where they can also use their voice for good. Yeah.
Well, it's an important message, and I'm glad that you raised it, because that's the role of Massey, to get junior fellows and people to think about the future and how important it is. So let's hear now. I just want to bring Matthew in just to. So you've heard the comments from both Dr. Augustine and Dr. Andrew. So was your experience the same? Does gender make a difference, or was it difficult for you, or did you feel scrutiny when you were first elected, first at City Council and then as an MP?
Well, I will share with you, in echoing the sentiment, that there is no more disrespected person on the planet than the Black woman. And that history has played that out time and time again. And so I will not pretend that my struggles are the same as my two very learned sisters. And I have to say, to be on this program with the always Honourable Jean Augustine, who in the 90s paved the way, and Dr. Jill, who just has a clarity in her analysis, which is so greatly appreciated across the country. I'll begin by stating that my existence as a Black politician is one of solidarity, and we are constantly in solidarity. I want to begin by acknowledging I'm here in solidarity with the land defenders of 1492 land back here in Haudenosaunee territory. And I want to, share with you that when I was when I was in fourth grade, I remember seeing this man on stage who was just dignified and elegant and powerful. And I'd never seen a Black man so elevated in community. And I remember asking my mom, it was the day of the child. I was plucked out of school, sent to this event down at Convention Center. I said, "Who is that man?" And she said, that's the Honourable Lincoln Alexander. And I was blown away. I was like, "What does he do?" And she said, "He's a politician." I knew at 9 that, that I was likely to be a politician, because I had never seen a Black man represented in that way. But the challenge is that in Hamilton, when you grow up with the mythology of the Honourable Lincoln Alexander, Hamilton's favorite Hamiltonian, who in the 60s was elected as the first Black member of Parliament. But the challenge is, it took 40 years before somebody else came around. And I was, being elected, and you hear this theme, right, with Dr. Jean Augustine, with Dr. Jill Andrews, with myself, that within the last 10 or 20 years, we're still celebrating firsts, which is absurd.
Yeah,
it is absolutely absurd. So I think what you're hearing from all of us is that this is a process of ensuring that while we may be the first, we're not the last, that we create elevators instead of pulling up ladders, that we want to make sure future generations can learn from the challenges that we face, but also have the opportunities that perhaps we didn't quite have.
It's so wonderful. So let me bring all of you together then. We've been reflecting a lot on the role of the Black Lives Matter movement, and my question is, does it change something, for your action? I'll start with you, Dr. Augustine. I know that you're now a bit removed, but looking there, has it changed your perspective on political actions this summer and the ongoing fights?
Well, I think the whole world has sat up to look at all the inequities. I think when we, the gaps in those, the haves and the have-nots, and as Jill mentioned, the issue of employment, who are the essential workers, who are the faces in our organizations. Corporate Canada have to begin to say, look at our boardrooms. Where are the voices? How can we make those voices? We have done, Nathalie, and you know this, over the years, we've done surveys, we've done reports, we've put everything on the table. And so we know the situation. We know the percentage of in our population, in our workplaces. We know who is sitting where as decision makers. And if all the voices are not there, and if we truly believe that we are a diverse society, if we truly do the boast that we are multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, if we truly believe in what we have seen happen in the society, then we know that we have to make the change. And I think this COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter discussion that has caught all around the world, has involved everyone all around the world to reflect. And of course, we go back to things like the United Nations, the Decade for People of African Descent, recognizing that no matter where we are as people of African descent in the world, we are disadvantaged in very, very many ways. And we need to do something about this. So this pandemic time, this focus on who are the essential workers, who are providing care in these homes, what we need to do around justice, and the conversations around anti-Black and systemic discrimination gives us that opportunity to ensure that when we get on the other side of this pandemic, that we are a more inclusive society.
Yeah. That it's that we just don't go back to normal as discriminatory and racist as it was. It has to be a different story. Dr. Andrew, has Black Lives Matter changed something in your political action, or in the opportunity for the visibility of the issue? Or
I would absolutely say that Black Lives Matter has left an indelible mark on every single person's existence, I would say, across the globe, certainly here in Toronto, Ontario. And of course, Black Lives Matter, stands on the shoulders, of the Black women's collectives. It stands on the shoulders of folks who, have been advocating against systemic anti-Black racism long before, that word became part of our everyday vernacular, right? For me particularly, what it has done for me is it has validated, it's validated the work, myself and colleagues at the Toronto District School Board, the Student Equity Program Advisors, shout out to my friends and colleagues there. It's validated, the tutelage, I was lucky to have with UFT professor Jackie Alexander, who spoke, so eloquently in her book, Pedagogies of Crossings. It has validated every conversation that every Black person that I've had with, in every corner store, in every classroom, in every workplace, on every public transit, because we talk in public transit, because oftentimes, Black people, I would argue, we're either hyper visible or we're not visible, and oftentimes, sometimes just walked through in public space. So in my opinion, Black Lives Matter has exposed a conversation that all of us, many of us, I should say, I can't speak for our entire Black community in Ontario or in Canada, but many of us have been having behind closed doors, in front of those doors, since the day we can speak. I think of my dear mother, who told me very, very early on, I didn't have to work 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times harder. Her saying was, Jilly, you better work 10 times as hard as the white person to get half of what they're going to get, unearned in many cases, right?
Yeah.
So Black Lives Matter allows for a conversation for us to engage with these heavy hitting issues. But I think Black Lives Matter has also woken up many white folks who have lived in the privilege of their skin to be unaware and unconcerned with what's happening. And now all of a sudden you have to take stock. What does it mean to be an ally? How do I be responsible as a white person? What am I willing to give up? I can stand there, Black Lives Matter, but what am I willing to give up in order to ensure that I'm on those front lines fighting for Black lives?
And it's the universality of it, like the whole world has stopped, and the whole world seemed to be engaged in that conversation. And we must not forget the issue of social media and how we're able in this world with the camera, with the instant photo, how it was so easy for the whole world to see the savagery of George Floyd.
And the words are still so prevalent. I can't read it. I think it captured so much the sense of despair and urgency to do something. So Matthew, has that influenced your action? Are they things you do differently now than as it opened up some avenues of action that were not there before?
Well, I'll reflect back on my sister, Jill, who quite eloquently stated that before she was a politician, she was Black. And I'll share with you that before I was a city councilor, I was fighting these issues in my community. For anybody who is from the Black community, you have experienced anti-Black racism. You have experienced these systems of brutality. This is not new to us. And I want to, rather than answer the question you gave me, I want to answer the question that I think should be posed, which is whites and whiteness positionality vis-a-vis Black issues around anti-Black racism. So the difference between people who are experiencing it versus those who can observe it. And it's in the observation that our humanity becomes up for debate, that we have to have a slogan that reaffirms that Black Lives Matter in this day and age. This is not new. This didn't happen in the summer. I need to say this, that, the Black Lives Matter TO that did direct action, and it was direct action, by the way, that started this 6 years ago, 2014, 2015, when they camped out on the footsteps of the Toronto Police Service with the then police chief, Bill Blair, who is now, by the way, the Minister of Public Safety. It shows that people in these systems of white supremacy who engage in systems of oppression like street checks and carding and racial profiling, they're not vilified. But it's the people who are on the front lines that are sacrificing their bodies, because that's what we're witnessing when we see the police brutality and the viciousness of white supremacy and policing, when you see folks being brutalized on social media, when you see the response in Montreal, in Toronto, when Black voices stand up, whether it's in Pride or whether it's at mass rallies where they're met with tear gas or they're met with social exclusion. So has it changed me? No, but I certainly hope it has awoken, that there's been an awakening of intelligence within Canada to, for the first time, pay heed to what we've been saying for hundreds of years.
For a long time. Yeah.
For a very long time.
Yes.
So let me bring in an interview with Mike Coteau, because I asked him the same question, and I'd like to, and then we can comment on what he's saying and bring it back together. Let's hear what he had to say. I'm so happy to have you with me, Michael Coteau, MPP Coteau. It's a delight to talk to you again. And as I explained, this week we're talking a bit about being Black in politics. And you've been in politics for quite a long time now. Can you tell me a little bit what's been your experience of racism and discrimination in politics?
It's interesting. I was just actually writing a speech yesterday that I'm delivering tomorrow about my experience in politics, and I was thinking about how I've grown up distrusting politics and government, but yet, I've served 18 years as an elected official. It's kind of ironic, growing up listening to, groups like Public Enemy and artists like KRS-One. There's always been a distrust for power, and I think that's one of the reasons that drew me into politics. And I grew up in a neighborhood in Toronto where the powers that were there, the education system, the police, corporations, the landlords, they had power, and sometimes that power was misused. And being a young kid growing up, for example, wanting to be one of the good guys on, admiring like police shows, and then having an interaction with a police officer, and finding out that that you weren't allowed to be part of the good guys, you were kind of pushed into another category, kind of started, I think, a bit of resentment towards power. And going through the political experience I've gone through, because as being in the legislature, being in cabinet, being part of government gives you the opportunity to correct things that you think are not right. And I think it's the experience I've had and the distrust for politics and government in general that drew me even further into politics to try to fix things.
And I know you've done a lot. I remember being in the legislature with you and talking about dealing with the issues of children in care, and then setting up the anti-racism directorate and so on. Do you think the Black Lives Matter movement will have changed the way being Black in politics is experienced?
The Black Lives Matter movement in Toronto. It's interesting. I did a interview with Vogue magazine, and they were asking about the experience back in around 2016 in Toronto, Ontario, with Black Lives Matter. And I remember sitting down with and they were mostly young people who were the leaders within Black Lives Matter in Toronto that I got to speak to. And it was a whole new approach to, to political discourse and challenging the status quo. I was very receptive to it, because anyone who's trying to make a difference in politics, to me, is someone that, I want to, I want to connect with. I wanted to be part of that discussion. And, even my conversations with them, the very language we used was very different from my generation's language. I can remember the first time I heard the term anti-Black racism, and you could imagine me being at the forefront of change at the Toronto District School Board, introducing, a motion and driving the need for the collection of disaggregated race-based data, being really deep into that change from a political standpoint, but also, very connected to anti-Black racism, but not using that phrase ever at the school board. And then Black Lives Matter comes, and the language starts to change, the expectations start to change. And I think that they played a critical role in moving the political agenda here in Ontario that resulted in something like the anti-racism directorate being established, and the renewed sense of challenging the police department, the government, the mayor. And I think that they had an impact, because the language in which politicians use today has completely changed. The Premier of Ontario last year admitted for the first time that systemic racism was real. This was because of advocacy work of, people like, who were involved in just the push that, that Black Lives Matter got people to get out there and advocate for.
Thank you. So thank you. What do you think he's saying? And anything that you drew from this? A new language, a language that he felt empowered to use. But I take your point that it's maybe a long time that things should have been taken care of, paid attention to. So, what's the agenda for now? Like, what's the agenda? What are you hoping to accomplish during this? This is Black History Month. What's your hope for this month? What do you want people to take from this month? Jill, let's start. Dr. Andrew. Yeah.
Oh, Jill, it's fine. You know, here's what's important. Here's what's really critical. Black History Month is a seminal month where we get to acknowledge, you know, Black lives, you know, our history, yes. But we need to move past the borders of this month and recognize that we must celebrate, we must acknowledge, we must push back and frankly disrupt, you know, systems of power, you know, that are quite happy remaining at a status quo. Like, let's make no mistake here. You know, systems that push Black folks out, they are created for that very agenda, and they work for those they work with, and that's why they're there. So we've got to have those conversations throughout the year, and we have to put actions to those conversations. You know, what resonated the most with what MPP Coteau said, you know, was his distrust of politicians in general. You know, and I can tell you, as someone who had to be asked several times, as the Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine mentioned, with regards to getting into politics, you know, I too had a distrust for politics, for politicians, for the politricks, quite frankly, that are inherent to politics. You know, and here I am in this moment, you know, as a new MPP, and even as I was running, shocked to know that things like carding and racial profiling were still on the books, you know, issues that this government, the previous Ontario government, you know, could have walked away with a wand. You know, that's the key of being in government. So for me, that shows us the work that still has to happen. You know, we need to end racial profiling. We need to end carding. You know, we talk about the Anti-Racism Directorate, you know, definitely a start, but let's talk about 1991, you know, when Zanena Conde, the first Black woman to sit in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, the first Black woman to hold a cabinet position in Canada, you know, was seminal to the Anti-Racism Secretariat. I mean, erasing a name and changing it, you know, is not necessarily transformative. You know, the issue here is what's happening with the Anti-Racism Directorate, and why is it that we are in this moment in 2021 with a premier who's only recognizing a year ago that systemic racism occurs or that it's real, you know? So we have a lot of work to do.
I think, Jill, that just listening also to Michael, I think that there are several factors that have created the urgency of now, so that we need to move forward, because we have been there. As he talked about the status quo, the language, the expectation, we had that, and we have the number of players who were lined up. We've had surveys. We've had, you know, the Roy McMurtry report, the Bob Ray's report. We've had, but I think and all these things are now nuanced. The language is now nuanced. And at the same time, the voices are getting stronger through the Black Lives Matter, I would say. But at the same time, it is the fact that we now have a critical mass, of the voices. And we're not asking the question, you know, who speaks for me? He doesn't speak for me. She doesn't speak for me. We've gotten past that. I think we're now more politically conscious of where we ought to be. I think we are now seeing through the education system, the young people that are marching past the stages, getting into different fields of endeavor, educating themselves, and willing to add their voices to make sure that there is change. And so it's looking back and saying, you know, we're not going to take this whatever anymore. We want to see changes. And this is why I keep saying over and over, we've talked the talk, now let's walk the talk. No more surveys, no more questionnaires, no more.
And that was very much the last week we had Al Jones here, who really was talking about the way the Black History Month is a Black Affirmation Month, a move toward action, and do you see that in the events that are being organized? Do you have a sense of empowerment, Matthew, in the way the events or the concepts are organized? Where there's
I'll share this, that look, I think what BLM did is they called the question on society's general responsibility towards Black communities, which then, of course, has resulted in an ongoing checklist of things that big organizations and institutions do. But I'm not clear that we're actually getting to where we need to go. We have instances right here in the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board where the trustees are using racist language. They're in care and control of our children. We have scenarios where, as a city councilor, this is what's clear. Look, identity politics without a class analysis or a justice analysis is empty and meaningless. It doesn't matter what you ascend to. At the end of the day, when I'm standing at a corner waiting for a bus, the police will still pull me over and profile me. It doesn't matter if I'm a city councilor. It doesn't matter how many doctors and lawyers and engineers we have ascend to success. These systems at the very root are built around white supremacy. They continue and remain to be built on white supremacy. So in Black History Month, the best thing that I get from it is getting a chance to connect to my family like I have right now. When we retreat in community and we celebrate, as I quote the good Dr. Jill Andrews, "My Blackness is excellence," that is never an issue, end quote. We got to put that on a mug. That's the beauty for us, because it's our retreat, it's our celebration on our resilience and our perseverance, and it's a reminder to us, okay, this is an us thing, that our victories throughout the generations are wins that are not held. We can never take them for granted. They are wins that we have to continue to fight for each and every single day.
It's a wise word. What about you, Dr. Andrew? What are you hoping that's going to be accomplished within the next year? Like, if you had a list of what you'd like to see in terms of results,
man. That is a huge question, and it's certainly one that allows me to dream, and allows me to have faith in those dreams. And I have to bring it back to students. When we are still in a province that doesn't have a provincial strategy for addressing anti-Black racism, and I'm proud, again, to be a member of the New Democrats and to have put forward such a motion, as part of my team, when we have that lacking in our schools, that's something that needs to change. This notion of working hard, this sort of a self-individualism, a neoliberalism, as some of our academic friends would call it, it's all good and dandy to work hard. And all of our Black students are working hard in schools. That doesn't change the impact of white supremacy. It doesn't change the disproportionate expulsions and suspensions Black youth will experience compared to their non-Black comrades, So this is something I want to see changed. I want us to have an education system that is reflective of our country, our province, our town. So our kids can go to school, with their backs up and their heads held high, with pride and with dignity. I want us to address, issues for workers, quite frankly. I can't stress enough. Black workers, Black women are at the front of the line with our PSWs, with our frontline healthcare workers. And all they're asking for, in my opinion, is paid sick days, an opportunity to be able to rest and collect their physical and mental selves so they can go out and take care of those who can afford to be, whether it's in private long-term care or home care situations or public long-term care or whatnot. So I want to see life better for our Black workers, for all workers, but of course for Black workers, for Black students. I want to see us not being gentrified out of our communities. I think about Little Jamaica, which is 10 minutes from me. I think about the construction, the demolitions, the Eglinton Crosstown, the impact COVID has had on our small businesses, on our Black identities in Little Jamaica. I want to see government that makes the changes, that allows us to actually feel alive and survive. And frankly, you know, my biggest wish is in 2022, you know, that I will have the opportunity to sit as a member of Ontario's new democratic government, quite frankly, and really see the changes that we're all talking
Minister
about.
Dr. Jill Andrews. I like that. I like that, Minister Andrews.
So then you'll have to come back. I hope you'll make time to come back and talk about, you know. So,
I tell you.
Let's talk a little bit. What about you, Dr. Augustine? Is there something, I mean, we've talked about race data. We want success, like we want accomplishments, we want action, you know. If you had a druthers, if you could, what would you like to see at the end of, you know, 2021, you know, as we get vaccinated and we're on the other side of the pandemic, if we hope. So what's
my emphasis would be on diversity and inclusion, that every boardroom of the nation would have all of the voices around the table. Every educational structure would have the diversity of the community within its structure. That all these things that, you know, Jill is so good at enumerating, and all these things will be taken care of in such a way because of the fact that we have those voices around the table, and we have people from all of the groups interacting, participating, and contributing. And that as we move forward, hopefully we move forward with recognition of diversity, a more diverse city, a more diverse community, a more diverse Canada, with inclusion as a bottom line, that everywhere we'll see this happen, and everyone will be conscious so that they look around their workplace, they look around their boardrooms, they look around at the institutional practices, the things that are built in. And there are lots of things that are built into system. And I'll give you one small example. I was talking to Frances Wright from the Famous Five the other day, and she asked me for my address. So I gave her my address, and then I got to the point of the postal code. And I said, M, and she says, M. I said, yes, M as in Michael. 8, V as in Victor. She says, hold it, Jean. We have to begin to change the mindset. She says, M as in Mary, and V as in Vicky.
Yes.
V as in Vicky. And I find myself now, anytime I give my postal code, I'm using the feminization of the alphabet rather than the, you know, what we have been. So these are, it's a small thing, but these are things that built into the system so that we behave and we act and we follow and we continue these ways of acting. And I'll end by talking about my pet subject these days, and that is something, the Sankofa bird. The Sankofa is a bird with its neck backwards, fetching something back there. And I keep talking about the Sankofa bird in terms of Black history. And I'm saying, like the Sankofa bird, we reach back. We look at where we've come from. We look at all the things that have been there, part of that history, part of that participation, part of the development of Canada, where we've been, We bring it to the front, which is what the bird does. Takes the neck from there, bring it to the front, examines, looking at what came from the past, looking at the present, what is affecting the present, and then it makes a decision to go forward. And so I use that as a kind of imagery. You know, we have to know the past, we have to examine it in the present, and then the decision to go forward. And I think that 2022, we would have gone forward after having done the Sankofa, looking back, the examination, Black Lives Matter in the present, and the decision that all of us in Canadian society would make, that discrimination, that anti-Black racism, who are our neighbors, who are our essential workers, who are we dependent on the society, and what better policies are made as a result of the inclusion of everyone. And we have the stats that tell us when the voices are around the table, we make better decisions.
Well, that's very important, actually, that we'll have the opportunity to reimagine a better world. It's as we talked a little bit about moving forward in a way that does not just repeat the past. I wanted to make sure that people knew that they can ask questions, put them in the YouTube, and I'll be happy to put them to our guest if you so wish. Yes, Matthew.
Would I be able to add? Yeah, so I'm inspired by the Honourable Jean Augustine and the call for diversity and inclusion. I want to push further. I feel like my job is to push, and I want to push the people who are watching to ask more than just equity and diversity and inclusion, which, certainly is a start. Let's talk about justice. Let's talk about dismantling systems that perpetuate white supremacy at the expense of everybody else. Let's talk about capitalistic systems which force shareholder value to be put over the very lives and existences of people. So, if we could look back a year from now, post-COVID, in a just recovery, that just recovery can only happen through a framework of very basic concepts of justice. And it doesn't just have to be racial justice. We're talking about ecological justice. We're talking about economic justice. And I think that this is the dream deferred of Canada, that if we want to be who we say we are, then we have to take a deep and long stare in the mirror and count the ways in which we fall short, and count the ways in which we continue to politically estrange and marginalize and commodify the very existence of people's lives here, starting, of course, with the original sin, which is that of the ongoing and colonization and settlement of Indigenous territories.
Thank you for having brought that. Or I think we have a question from Cash. Selena's Chavannes' memoirs assert that the federal commitment to racial equality is insincere and performative. That is, its sole use for her was to exploit her in gesture politics. Is that a fair statement? Interesting question. Let's start with you, Dr. Augustine.
Well, since I haven't read the book, I have the book. But I've been doing so many of these Black History Month Zooms that I haven't been able to sit down to get through it. At the same time, this is a question for all of us as BIPOC people. When we are in certain situations, are we there as token? Are we there as gesture? Are we given the opportunity to have our voices heard? Are we there to be as authentic as we can in response to what is before us? And oftentimes the challenge, and this is why we say it's not just one person. In the situation of women, we say we have to have a 30%, we have to have a critical mass before we see decisions and whatever made around a specific table. And so I would agree that oftentimes there is a gesture, but oftentimes the response is always, if one is not there, then the conversation does not get advanced.
Yeah, you take advantage of the fact that even if you're there with a token, you can still say something. You can still.
Well, I mean, you can, but I mean, like, let's be honest. This is Sister Selena Chavannes, who rose to become, the parliamentary secretary to the prime minister, and had to put that man in his place because of the way that he disrespected her in her blackness, in the positionality of his power. So again, identity politics, absence of justice, is just an exercise in aesthetics. And we need to move beyond the aesthetics of I'm going to say small L liberalism. This is of no disrespect to, because I love, Sister Jean Augustine and Brother Coteau. But this is about small L liberalism, which would present this idea of identity politics, absence of a commitment to justice. And that's what we need.
So let's hear another question from Stephen Mensa. What's their biggest advice for young Black youth seeking to enter politics? So good questions. So let's start with you, Dr. Andrews. Yeah, Jill, what are you saying to the folks there?
Goodness.
Mhm.
I am telling young Black folks to take the leap. Take the leap. One of the first things that I had a chance of doing while at Queen's Park, newly elected, was connecting with my Black Caucus members, talking with our leader, Andrea Horvath, and us engaging in bringing so many youth to Queen's Park. Youth who identified some as NDP, liberal, conservative, green, it didn't matter. They were Black youth and other racialized youth who identified with wanting to hold politicians accountable. And they came to our tables and they've been on our phones and we continue to email them, because what Black youth and other racialized youth need to see is not only representation, because I say this often, all skin folk aren't kinfolk. And frankly, some of those people of color and Black folks in power are the ones upholding the very things that are strangling us in the streets and causing us not to graduate and not getting the jobs. So not all skin folk are kinfolk, right? But Black youth, join politics. Reach out to your elected official. Tell your favorite caring adult. Reach out to me. I'm very accessible on social media. And I have had the pleasure of speaking with many youth who are engaged across party lines, and the message is get involved, but remember, don't make guarantees. When you become a politician, the one thing I don't do is make guarantees, because that's when you lose faith in politicians, when they guarantee something and they do not follow through. And we've seen that. We've seen that show. We've listened to the sound, the score of that show. We've seen the credits roll by that film time and time again. So I would tell Black youth, jump on in. Get connected with organizations that are doing great work. I think of folks like, Reclaim Eglinton. I think of Black Urbanism TO, here, but by us in St. Paul's. I think of Tropicana, an organization that is so near and dear to my heart, that helped raise me, quite frankly. Reach out and talk, but don't let anyone tell you that you're not smart enough, you're not old enough to get involved, or it's not your place. Because I think Viola Desmond showed us never to know our place. Our place is everywhere, including politics.
Good word. So what about you, Dr. Augustine? Any advice to young people looking to go into politics?
I think that it's important for them to know that they can do it. It's important for them to recognize that they need to be prepared. They need to start off by talking to the representative, what level of politics they would like to get into, because sometimes I want to get into politics. Do you want to get into provincial politics, federal politics? What orientation have you got? What are you passionate about? Who can be a mentor for you? Who would be part of your network to help the team building, as well as the funds that you would need to run a good campaign? And the other day I was talking to some young people, Jill, and I said to them, watch what you're putting on social media. Because
oh yeah,
were you saying that to me? That sounds like that was advice to me. I get into trouble every now and again.
I think it was advice to me. I stand by what I put on social media.
So that's good, very good practical advice there. So what about
it
you?
It is.
I'm sorry,
Matt. What's any advice, and then I'll ask you just to wrap. Yes, any advice?
Yeah, I mean, the first obvious advice is find somebody who shares values with you. Find somebody, or find a party, or find a cause that you really deeply care about and share values with. Don't get involved with people that you can't trust. Don't get involved with people who don't share your values, because power is real. And what you're doing in the process of politics is you hopefully are building community power. So you want to do that in an intentional way. Know that you have a tremendous amount of power going into it. That if you have the ability to go and sign up your friends and your neighbors, you can cause for the candidate that you want to become nominated, and that nominated candidate to become elected, and that elected person to go to whatever position or level they're in, from school boards all the way up. There are systems and principles about elections that are simple, but they're not easy. They're simple, but they're not easy. So if you have the tenacity to get after it, then I would suggest you find people, call folks. You'd be amazed at who will speak to you and give you advice if you just pick up the phone and call them. I'm one of them. So feel free to connect with me on Twitter, Matthew Green, NDP, and I'd be happy to answer any remaining questions you might have.
So I know that you have to go because I've taken too much of your time already. So I just want to say thank you so much. What a wonderful way. Maybe I'll just ask you, Jill, very quickly, one last word to our audience before you go.
One last word. Thank you for the opportunity, first of all, Nathalie, for being here. The Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine, thank you for your wisdom and for those quiet conversations that we have had in the past. Matthew Green, it's always a pleasure. And just to wrap up on that note of getting Black youth involved, getting Black and racialized people involved in politics, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our BIPOC Victory Fund. You know, this is our opportunity as an MPP, as a proud New Democrat, to help others, BIPOC communities get into politics, because we know that campaigns are expensive, but we also know that even applying to become a candidate, is classist in many cases. And certain parties, the prices are just absorbent, you know what I mean? So we want folks to know that as an NDP, we're here, and we are, not only an obvious choice, but we are a choice that doesn't only talk about equity and representation and inclusivity, which are very important things. But I have to echo my brother Matthew in talking about justice and talking about the issues that folks don't want to talk about. We're talking about them. So check us out. And of course, reach me online. Jill's last word. Thank you so much for having me. Keep safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Keep safe.
So final words, Dr. Augustine, what would you want our viewers to remember from this discussion?
I would like them to remember that there are opportunities to become real allies, that there are opportunities for all of us to work towards this just society that we want, not only for ourselves, but for the generations to come. And that there is work to be done, and that they get together as allies and make the difference that is so important for us at this specific point in time. So let's all get together, let's all work together, and let's build the kind of society of the future.
Thank you. So I just want to thank all three of you for participating in this dialogue. It's wonderful, really nice to have you here. I want to thank our tech team, and I want to say that we're trying to involve other parties as well, and it will come. They just weren't available for today. So thank you very much for engaging at Massey on this important question. Merci beaucoup.